Welcome back and thanks for stopping by. I'm going to be ranking the 10 most important heavy metal bands of all time. But before we start, if you're new to my channel, hit the subscribe button, click the like, leave a comment, all that good stuff helps my channel out and I greatly appreciate it. So let's dive straight in here at number 10. 10th most important metal band of all time, in my opinion, Motorhead. So Motorhead, yeah, they're probably not what you consider a traditional heavy metal band. They were probably a little bit earlier than a lot of the heavy metal bands that came out in the early 80s, particularly from Britain. But they certainly had an influence on the style. In terms of the pure aggression and power that they had in their music, it was definitely an influence on further generations of heavy metal, particularly in America. They were very fast. Their music was extremely fast, a lot faster and harder than anything that was recorded previously. And this is certainly something that the thrash metal scene in San Francisco took on board. Their vocals were raw and shouting and growling. They took a lot of influence from punk music as well, in terms of the speed and just, getting to the point, maybe getting away from the prog elements that were very popular in the 1970s. And that was something that, heavy metal was very big on, certainly in the early forms. So yeah, I think Motorhead certainly deserved a place as one of the most important heavy metal bands of all time. So they're at number 10. At number 9, and I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by this one, it's Led Zeppelin. Now you may be asking, what have Led Zeppelin got to do with heavy metal? But if we go back to the late 1960s and look at what was happening in terms of rock music, there wasn't an awful lot of distorted guitars. Like, obviously you had Eric Clapton had released the Beano album in 1966. The Who had come onto the scene. You had the Kinks, bands like that, and music was starting to get a bit more aggressive. But I think Led Zeppelin took it to a whole new level. Certainly, like songs like Communication Breakdown, Black Dog, Whole Lotta Love, these are just like really, really heavy rock songs. And I think as well with Robert Plant, his vocal range being so high, I think that brought another element into music in terms of pushing the vocals, and that was a big thing for heavy metal which followed. And a lot of heavy metal bands cited Led Zeppelin as a massive influence, particularly as we got into the mid to late 70s and into the 1980s as well. So I think Led Zeppelin were a huge influence on heavy metal. Drumming as well. The drums from John Bonham were absolutely huge. They sounded monstrous. They were heavy. The riffs from Jimmy Page with his guitars were really, really heavy. He wasn't afraid to try different tunings as well. So yeah, I think Led Zeppelin definitely should be credited with having a massive influence on heavy metal, and they're definitely an important band when it comes to heavy metal, in my opinion. At number 8, it's Rage Against the Machine. So Rage Against the Machine, maybe they wouldn't be considered a traditional heavy metal band, but they certainly opened the door for combining elements of hip-hop into metal, or even rap into metal. This was their debut album that was released in 1992. Of course, self-titled debut album. And this album is extremely heavy. It's very groove-laden, but it's unbelievably heavy. Like the bomb track "Killing in the Name." "Killing in the Name" is one of the best metal heavy songs of all time. "Take the Power Back," "Bullet in the Head," "Know Your Enemy," "Wake Up." Just absolutely fantastic, this album. But what they really did was they paved the way for other bands like Korn, Limp Bizkit, Linkin Park to kind of take up the mantle and combine elements of hip hop with heavy music. And I think the guitar work by Tom Morello on this is nothing short of phenomenal. He's an absolute virtuoso, and I think this was a very important band in relation to heavy metal. Next up, again, might be another surprise, but it's Deep Purple. Now, I think Deep Purple had a huge influence on the evolution of heavy metal. I suppose if we start off with Ritchie Blackmore, the guitar work, the way he played guitar, was nothing like anything else that was coming out in the late 1960s. He used different scales. He had a speed and dexterity across the fretboard that nobody else really had at that time. Sure, Eric Clapton was a fantastic blues guitar player. Jimmy Page was a fantastic heavy riff and lead guitar player, great inventor as well with sounds. You had Jeff Beck, who was a virtuoso also, but maybe Jeff Beck didn't have the band structure to showcase his talents as well. But Ritchie Blackmore, in my opinion, he was absolutely phenomenal in that era and groundbreaking as well. If you take songs like Highway Star and Speed King, Bloodsucker, all these songs, they're heavy metal songs. There's no doubt about it. You listen to the riffs, you listen to the lead guitar parts, absolutely no doubt about it. It's heavy metal. And then you take a vocalist like Ian Gillan on top of that, again, absolutely screaming and screeching, but making it sound really, really good, really, really aggressive, but really, really good. That just brings it to a different level for me in terms of heavy metal vocalists. So I think Deep Purple should definitely be credited with inspiring a lot of people to start heavy metal. I haven't even mentioned Ian Pace, who was an absolutely thunderous, fantastic drummer. So yeah, Deep Purple are definitely one of those bands that were a massive influence on heavy metal bands, and they definitely deserve their place there. So what are we on to now? We are on to number 6. So this band really started the death metal scene, in my opinion, Slayer. I wouldn't be the biggest Slayer fan. I actually only own one album by the band. It's this one, Rain and Blood, from 1986, I believe. But yeah, there's no doubt about the influence that Slayer had on future generations and future genres of music, particularly doom metal, black metal, death metal. Again, I'm not a fan of all that Cookie Monster singing and growling vocals. Wouldn't really be my thing, but you have to appreciate the influence that they had on those bands. This album was so heavy when it was released in the 1980s, but if you look at it nowadays, it actually doesn't seem to be as heavy as a lot of the stuff that's around now. So yeah, absolutely brilliant metal band, Slayer, to be fair. Excuse me. 2 fantastic guitar players in Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman, and then Tom Araya with the screaming vocals out front, and of course Dave Lombardo on drums. Very important heavy metal band, and definitely deserved a place in this list at number 6. So we move into the top 5 now. At number 5, it's Judas Priest. Heavy metal band from Britain. Came out of the new wave of British heavy metal. They were one of the forerunners. Again, they had a twin lead guitar style with KK Downing and who's the other guy? Glenn Tipton. Absolutely fantastic. The frontman, Rob Halford, he was absolutely brilliant. But I think with Judas Priest, they brought in a lot of the imagery to heavy metal in terms of the way they dressed. They were big into, studs and leather and biker gear and all that type of stuff. And I think that helped to push heavy metal in the direction of not just being fast, aggressive music played by virtuosos that could really sing high and really play guitar really well. It was also the whole imagery aspect, which Led Zeppelin had started, to be fair to them, in the 1970s. But I think Judas Priest took it a step further when they started releasing albums in the late 70s, early 80s. And this album in particular, British Steel, I think is absolutely fantastic. A great album by Judas Priest and well worth checking out. And again, Judas Priest, they were massively influential to future generations of metal bands, so definitely deserve their place here at number 5 in the most important metal bands of all time. Okay, coming in at number 4, it's Pantera, the Cowboys from Hell. Absolutely brilliant band. Completely turned metal around on its head when it was getting a little bit stale in the mid-90s. There's no doubt about it. They were really influenced by the groove metal scene. So a lot of their songs, they're not as fast. Well, they do have fast songs, there's no doubt about that. But they also have songs that are maybe a little bit slower in tempo, but really, really groove well. they had a fantastic guitar player in the name of Dimebag Darrell, who was absolutely fantastic. He was a great rhythm guitar player. He could shred. And his brother was on drums. Again, another big drummer who had a massive personality and was able to get that across in the songs. The interplay between Dimebag and Vinnie Paul was unbelievable. And then up front, they had one of the most notorious vocalists of all time, Phil Anselmo. And he was able to scream and shout and do it with aggression, but still sound quite good. Didn't really go into the Cookie Monster territory too much, a little bit here and there, but I think Pantera are absolutely fantastic band and definitely worth their place in the top 5 of the most important metal bands of all time. So now we go into the top 3, but before we go into the top 3, I just want to give some honourable mentions to some bands. So we have Megadeth, formed by Dave Mustaine in the mid-1980s following his departure from Metallica. I think Megadeth have always been considered Metallica's poor cousin, and was probably right, to be honest. Like, I think if you look at the whole body of their work, they've got some great albums in there. Like this one here, Rust in Peace, is a fantastic album. Countdown to Extinction is a great album as well. And then there's So Far So Good So What is decent, and Peace Sells But Who's Buying is a great album as well. After that, there's a lot of their albums are kind of mixed. They don't really knock it out of the park on every single album. I don't think they're consistent enough. And especially in the last 15, 20 years, Dave Mustaine, he had issues with his arm, so he disbanded the band. Then he put the band back together. They've had a revolving door of musicians coming in and out of the band for the last 20 years. And to be honest, like I think a lot of the new material they release, it's not great. Like a lot of it is very formulaic. Doesn't really grab me. But certainly their place in metal history is important. But they're just outside the top 10 for this ranking. Okay, another band that deserve an honourable mention is Rainbow. Obviously, Ronnie James Dio, he created the metal horn symbol. So that's one thing that they definitely should be credited for. But if you're not aware of who Rainbow are, they were formed by Ritchie Blackmore after he left Deep Purple in the late 1970s. And they were an absolutely fantastic band, to be honest. My favourite excuse me, my favourite rendition of the band is when it's Ritchie Blackmore on guitar with Ronnie James Dio on vocals. That, in my opinion, is the best rendition of the band. Ronnie James Dio was a fantastic singer, absolutely brilliant. He actually had a stint with Black Sabbath as well. But he had fantastic screaming vocals, great for heavy metal. And again, I spoke about Ritchie Blackmore earlier. Like, Ritchie Blackmore was absolutely fantastic, especially on some of those early Rainbow albums. Songs like Stargazer. There's no doubt about it. It's heavy metal, and he was a massive influence on heavy metal. The next band is UFO. So they also deserve an honourable mention. Led, of course, by Michael Schenker before he left for the Scorpions. But yeah, I think UFO's first few albums, absolutely fantastic with Michael Schenker. Songs like Doctor Doctor and Rock Bottom, Natural Thing, Out in the Street, absolutely brilliant. And if you listen to Michael Schenker's guitar, you can really hear, especially in his lead guitar work, his influence all over metal. So he's one of these virtuoso guitar players, but he's influenced people like Kirk Hammett from Metallica and many other metal guitar players. So UFO, definitely a massive influence on heavy metal, but just outside the top 10. And I also want to give an honourable mention to Irish band Thin Lizzy. Of course, we have to have an Irish band in the list. Now, Thin Lizzy, this album I'm holding up actually is it's called Thunder and Lightning. It was their last studio album before they disbanded, and then Phil Lynott passed away in 1986. But in this album, they brought on a guitar player called John Sykes, who had played with a band called the Tigers of Pantang, and they created a much different album to what they had created previously. The songs are heavier, they're faster, and yeah, I just think this is a great album. The standout tracks on this one are the title track Thunder and Lightning and a song called Cold Sweat. And yeah, absolutely brilliant. They're definitely metal tracks, there's no doubt about it. I think this album actually divides a lot of opinion with Thin Lizzy fans, Personally, I like all incarnations of Thin Lizzy. I like the early stuff with Eric Bell, where they're kind of folksy, bluesy, psychedelic kind of stuff. I like the twin lead guitar stuff with the likes of Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson, and then later Gary Moore and even Snowy White. And then I absolutely love this album with John Sykes. John Sykes is one of my favourite guitar players of all time. So certainly love this stuff, and I think Thin Lizzy definitely deserves to be in there in terms of an influential metal band, but they're just outside the top 10. So now we're into the top 3. Okay, so at number 3, Black Sabbath, the godfathers of heavy metal. Absolutely brilliant band. They really started the whole thing. If you look at their lyrical content about demons and the devil and death and all that sort of stuff, what they were singing about then, that just opened the door into, you know, heavy metal and what sort of themes could be explored in heavy metal, I suppose. Ozzy Osbourne was a great vocalist, no doubt about it. He was absolutely brilliant with Black Sabbath for their first 8 albums, and then went on to have an immensely successful solo career on his own with fantastic guitar players joining him, such as the late Randy Rhoads, Zakk Wylde, Jake E. Lee. So yeah, absolutely fantastic. Ozzy, no doubt about it. In terms of guitar playing, Tony Iommi, the riff master, he's absolutely brilliant. He was able to create so many memorable riffs, and that's what forms the basis of all these fantastic songs. Yeah, just brilliant. Tony was absolutely brilliant at creating riffs and creating a whole groove and melody and everything. His lead guitar playing, some people say it's not the best. Personally, I don't have any problem with it. I think it fitted very well for Black Sabbath and what they were doing. But yeah, he really drove that band, even when, you know, Ozzy was kicked out and they went through various different lead vocalists. They had Ronnie James Dio in for a number of albums. They had Ian Gillan, they had Glenn Hughes. So yeah, they had a very turbulent time. But I think Tony was really the rock that kept Black Sabbath together, and he's an absolutely phenomenal guitar player. We also had a fantastic rhythm section of Geezer Butler, who played bass but wrote a lot of the lyrics, certainly on the early stuff, and also Bill Ward on drums, who is fantastic on the early Black Sabbath albums. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But yeah, Black Sabbath are one of the classic heavy metal bands. I know a lot of people listen to them now and say, it doesn't really sound like heavy metal, it just sounds like rock and roll or heavy rock. But back in the late 1960s, when Black Sabbath originally came out, they completely broke the mold. Even in terms of the imagery, the way they looked, like they were totally different to anything else at the time. And they certainly, you know, opened a lot of doors for heavy metal. And the funny thing is, they're probably more revered now than they were when they were actually out, which is always strange when things like that happen with bands. Okay, coming in at number 2, it is Iron Maiden. Yeah, British heavy metal band, formed in London in the early 1980s, and yeah, they are just an absolute machine. I've been lucky enough to see them on tour a number of times. Most recently in 2022, I believe, and even though they're all 60 plus, they are absolutely fantastic live, and they don't leave anything on the stage. Like, they just go out and give a fantastic performance. They've had a number of different minor lineup changes throughout the years, but Steve Harris, the bass player and primary songwriter, he's been there through thick and thin for the whole band. They have great lead guitar players, as you expect from a heavy metal band. They used to have 2 lead guitar players back in the 80s and 90s, but now they have 3. Since Adrian Smith rejoined the band, they decided to keep it as a 3 lead guitar player assault, which kind of works. It works for them, so that's the main thing. A great drummer in Nico McBride, and of course one of the all-time great metal vocalists in Bruce Dickinson. An absolutely phenomenal band, and just miss out on the number 1 spot. And I think everyone can probably guess who the number 1 spot is. It is, of course, the mighty Metallica. The number 1 most important heavy metal band of all time. So there may be people that agree with this, there may be people that disagree with this, but ultimately I think Metallica, they just basically pushed the boundary of heavy metal the whole time. They kept pushing and pushing. Obviously, from a commercial point of view, they are far and away, not even like, they're one of the most, well, they are the most successful heavy metal band of all time commercially, but they're also one of the most successful hard rock bands of all time. commercially. Probably up there second to AC/DC. But to be honest, like Metallica, from when they started, they just had this drive to, you know, push the boundaries all the time and get better and do new things. They evolved from every single album throughout the 1980s, from Kill 'Em All, through to Ride the Lightning, through Master of Puppets, through Justice for All. And then into the 90s then, they were able to come out with the Black Album, which is one of the highest selling albums of all time, and absolutely broke them through to the mainstream. So they started as an underground metal band in the 80s, but were able to get that breakthrough in the 1990s, and then things just skyrocketed there for them. They're still around, they're still gigging, they're still releasing material. Their last album was released last year, 2023. I see they have dates lined up for next summer, 2025. They're just an absolute machine, and they've pretty much the same four-piece. Three of the same four guys have been in the band since the very, very start, since they released Kill 'Em All, should I say. Dave Mustaine was in the band before Kill 'Em All was released, but then was kicked out. And then they have a number of different bassists through the years, but obviously Cliff Burton was the original bassist from back in the day. He passed away in 1986 and was replaced with Jason Newsted, who filled in the whole way through all the 90s and the success. And then in 2004, they brought in Robert Trujillo, who has been with them ever since and is the longest serving bass player with Metallica at the moment. But yeah, look, Metallica's music is absolutely fantastic. You've got one of the best rhythm guitar players in the world, James Hetfield. Don't know where the riffs come from, but he's just an absolute genius. He's got a fantastic right hand in terms of picking speed, and he's unbelievable, an absolute guitar god. He's also the lead vocalist and primary songwriter. So he's an absolute legend. And then you have Lars Ulrich, who has this determination and drive to take this band to new places, new heights all the time. He's relentless, he never gives up, and he's just constantly pushing the boundaries all the time, seeing what new things Metallica can do and what new boundaries they can push. But he's also heavily involved in the songwriting process in terms of putting the tracks together and all the different parts of the songs. So most songs on Metallica albums are written by James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich. You have Kirk Hammett as well, who also chips in with songwriting, but Kirk is just the perfect guitar player, perfect lead guitar player, should I say, for Metallica. Absolutely brilliant. And I know some people say, oh, maybe he's not as strong or he relies on his wah pedal, but I don't think any other lead guitar player would work with Metallica. I think Kirk is absolutely perfect for them. So yeah, an absolutely top-notch heavy metal band and fully deserving of the #1 spot on the 10 most important heavy metal bands of all time. So let me know in the comments what you think. What's your top 10 most important metal bands of all time? I'm sure loads of people are going to disagree with me, but put it in your comments. Let me know what your 1 to 10 is. And let me know why. If you disagree with any of the decisions I've made, please tell me why you think there might be a better band that could slot in there somewhere, or maybe you have a completely different top 10 to what I have. I would love to hear your comments. As I said before, if you could like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff helps out my channel, and I will talk to you on the next one. Bye now.